We will continue the momentum from day one here at Meeting on the Mesa. My name is Joe DePinto. I'm the head of Cell, Gene, and Advanced Therapies at McKesson. I run our vertical called InspiroGene. And I am privileged today to chair this panel on the evolution of CAR-T from niche treatment to mainstream care. Tim showed some really exciting data this morning on the market size and growth in the market. And for this space to be successful, it can't be niche. I have a great panel, very diverse backgrounds and experience that I'll allow them to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. So Warner, let's go with you first.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Warner Biddle. I'm the CEO of Kyverna. We're a late-stage development company focused on CAR-T therapies for autoimmune treatments. And prior to this, I was working at Kite for a number of years, also in the CAR-T space, but obviously on the hematological side. And prior to that, over 30 years in the industry. So just great to be with all of you here today and talk about this important momentum that we're generating in this space.
Great.
And I'm George Eastwood, Executive Director of the Emily Whitehead Foundation. Tom preceding us makes this pretty easy. You know, Tom always says an hour talk by him, 30 seconds of Emily makes that magical. And I guess we can say the same here. Tom for a half hour up there and 30 seconds of what we're doing here at the foundation. You know, my background coming from collections, manufacturing, and trying to connect all the dots here. This is the perfect conversation to follow up with what Tom said around the calls we get from patients, what that looked like 13 years ago, and what it looks like today, and how we all work together to make it happen. So thanks, everyone.
Well, hi everybody. I'm Gustavo Mahler. I'm the CEO of Cellistic. We are a company specialized in platforms and services around iPSC-based allogeneic cell therapies. We basically create the platforms for other companies to actually test and move from autologous into allo. And very glad to be here, a great panel. Myself, over 30 years experience in the biotech space and in this adventure in cell therapy and making access possible, right, at a reasonable price too, right?
And hi, everybody. I'm Navneet, Majhail, and I think I'm a misfit here because I'm a physician. I see patients, okay? So I see these patients who get these cell therapies. I'm a transplant cell therapy physician at Sierra Canyon. So I'm the physician-in-chief of blood cancers at the Sierra Canyon Cancer Network. Sierra Canyon is a cancer service line of HCA Healthcare. That's 190 hospitals in the US and the UK, and 2,500 plus sites of care. And within this ecosystem, we have 8 transplant cell therapy programs that'll do 1,500 transplant cell therapies, including 350 plus CAR-Ts this year. And I was just chatting with the panel before coming up. We're in the business of increasing access to cell therapies. In fact, we have 3 programs that are totally new, and they did their first CAR-Ts this year.
Hi, everybody. My name is Becky Poehnelt. I'm the global commercial lead at J&J for cell therapy, lymphoma, and leukemia. I've been about 20 years in the industry. I started as a basic scientist, then moved into commercial, worked for Merck for about 18 years. I'm really focused in oncology, and I've gotten into cell and gene therapy in the last 3 years, where I've been leading Carvykti as well as our lymphoma CAR-T at J&J and the rest of our portfolio there. So we're really excited about cell and gene therapy and its potential in the oncology space at J&J.
So as you can see, a great panel that really touches a variety of the cell and gene ecosystem, and we're all in the patient access business. Everybody here in Arizona really focused on how do we get these groundbreaking therapies to patients. Policy continues to shape healthcare. Cell and gene therapy is no exception there. It's been an active year at the FDA with changes early in the year, highly communicative around progress and what needs to happen for more patients to get access. Becky, let's start with you, and how do you see these changes, and how do you see J&J and your role really helping to make sure patients get access based on what's happening policy-wise?
Yeah, this is a great topic and a great time to be in the industry. We really view the regulators as our partners in helping us get these therapies in a safe and effective way to patients. And having been in this space for a few years now, have really seen a change in the policymakers becoming more of our partners as they get to understand this technology. I've seen this in other areas as well. Before I went to J&J, I was in the PD-1 space and similarly saw an evolution in policymakers. So I'm excited to see that here. We're excited about the recent changes or the recent guidance looking to help get therapies to patients faster, making some guidance on how to conduct trials in a more pragmatic fashion. And also, Tim mentioned earlier the change in the REMS programs around CAR T therapies, which I thought was we thought was a fantastic move in the right direction. So the FDA changed the guidance for patients to stay within an hour or 2 hours of the treatment center from 28 to 14 days, which is really, from patient perspective, a big deal. So to move near a treatment center for a month sounds extremely daunting. And we've seen many patients who are just like, I can't uproot my life for a month. I can't get caregiver for a month. It's just too much. 2 weeks, that's much more feasible. And also, we've seen that over time, physicians really can manage these therapies and the patients better. So it's really better all around to help patients get earlier access. And we're also seeing the earlier in a disease journey that a patient gets access to these therapies, the better. So we're really looking to continue to partner with ARM and the agencies and other organizations to make sure we also, as these therapies get better understood and better managed, can move towards a more accessible setup.
Navneet, how has the policy changes impacted the providers in giving care for these patients?
So, Joe, the administration is saying the right things, but we'll have to see when the rubber hits the road what happens. I think policy making has been chaotic, to say the least. So we'll have to see as things come out what that looks like. And a big concern on the provider side is the Medicaid cutbacks, right? I mean, some of the CMS reimbursement rules that are coming out for Medicare reimbursement, a lot of concerns there as to how that might impact what the providers get in terms of providing these therapies. And all that's been discussed about the health exchange cutbacks as well. So a lot of concerns that as all of these things pan out over the next many months, a year or two, we're afraid it'll cut down the access to healthcare in general, not just cell therapies.
Yeah, all good points, especially in the patient populations that you're dealing with. The government payment procedures it's an important component. So it's a big part of the mix, right?
Yeah, depending on which place you go to and what center you're at, anywhere from 30 to 50% of your patient population is Medicaid, Medicare focus. And if you add on a health exchange, that's even more.
Exactly. Gustavo, from a manufacturing perspective, how has the policy evolution impacted CDMOs in the manufacturing of these groundbreaking therapies?
Well, I will need to concur that is a kind of a mixed bag sometimes, right? So some of the policy around, for example, platform developments and the agency willingness to actually accept platforms and hear about that and create opportunities for manufacturers and for companies to actually have access to predefined processes that simplify the approval process is definitely a step forward. I think obviously there is the counter side of that is the general policy around what will happen with tariffs and across the board application of import restrictions at this point in time is, we are all in flux in that area, and it may have a significant impact on how products that are manufactured in different places, especially as we migrate into allo products, right? Where you will have maybe one site of production that supplies multiple places, and that may have an impact across the board in different regions of the world, definitely.
Sure. So looking at that from a standpoint of the short term versus more the midterm or the long term, how that evolves definitely is going to have an impact from a policy standpoint on manufacturing, centralized versus decentralized.
Absolutely. And I will say on top of that, generating manufacturing infrastructure is not a decision of 1 or 2 days. It's a very long-term decision. It takes you 3-4 years to build a facility and maybe a couple of years to approve it. And then, if policy changes very suddenly, you may find yourself in the wrong side of the spectrum where you made investments and how you did them, right? Yeah. So
no doubt. Infrastructure progress in that area definitely takes time.
Absolutely.
George, we heard about the Whitehead Foundation and policy being one of the new focuses. How do you see what's happening policy-wise impacting the patient perspective.
Yeah, and I think to Navneet's point, it's you ask patients and we see what they need, then we try to connect the dots across that ecosystem. So a large part of our movement and growth of our strategy is how do you connect those dots? We can hear about REMS requirements changing, but then we can also hear what Navneet says shortly after. How do they translate down? How early are we preparing for those changes and what they might mean clinically, but the logistics of it, right? We often think, and especially from my former life, the bottleneck of manufacturing, but there are the same logistical challenges on the delivery of healthcare side. I think tongue-in-cheek, I would say about a year ago that gene editing is easier than getting a CAR T paid for from a commercially approved drug, and then the baby KJ story basically proved that to be true. We can go from concept to a treatment delivered to someone with a bespoke gene editing faster than we could implement some of these policy changes we have. So when we made this decision a year ago, which we just launched last week, it's where can we start? So we partnered with Catalyst Healthcare, had a patient survey around long-term follow-up, and really started with what are patients experiencing and what's true and what's real. And in galvanizing that data and understanding the hardships that they've seen, moving things forward to try to push towards easier and gentler long-term follow-up with a many stakeholder group. So we have a preprint of an article that points to some of this data that shows the clinical relevance and want to push for guidance in cutting long-term follow-up for CAR T for 15 years to 5. But much like the REMS piece, even when that goes through, what does that actually mean for tackling the 80% of eligible patients that aren't getting it? Mm-hmm. And how do we frame that up to show success? And even if that number goal is 79% untreated getting it next year, how can we make that measurable and get those small actions going to make a difference?
Yeah, data certainly helps the situation, can't hurt the situation as you're really taking that voice of the patient to the policymakers, right? So I think that's certainly going to be advantageous to everyone here as they continue to make sure patients get access.
And I think we're all hardened as well by some of the words that are being publicly stated, and Tim touched on a little bit this morning with Dr. Prasad and Mahler and others, reinforcing again the need for cost-effective one-time therapies that can really transform diseases for patients. If you look around this room and what we're doing as an industry, this fits right into that mission, and I think that's something that we see because we've got RMAT designations for our first 2 indications, and the conversations that we're having with the FDA remain really positive because I think that long-term mission and that long-term goal is very much aligned with theirs as well.
Yeah, and you're in a unique position as a company looking to the future excitement in the space, right? So as you look at some of the guidance that's come out recently, positive, at least signs of what's been said. So again, we'll see over time.
Yeah.
But look, in a space that is still evolving, we'll take that short-term progress because we have to take advantage of it long-term, right?
100%.
So as we look at the United States and we look at treatment of cell and gene therapy in the United States, it's predominantly still being given at a small amount of sites. We'll say certain treatment centers that have been qualified to deliver these products. And that tends to be an access challenge at times. Tom talked about it previously about patients and their families having to travel. The 2 weeks versus 4 weeks certainly helps. But still, the best care is local care for these families so they don't have to travel. That will certainly cause a challenge from a referral process because you'll have to make sure that that referral gets to the right site of care. What progress have you seen in that? Now, maybe tap into some of your past experience in this referral process and what does good look like? And then Navneet, I'm going to want to hear it from you from a provider standpoint, what you see as well. But I'd love to hear the pharma perspective.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think we continue to look at the challenges, and I think we need to. But I think we also have to recognize just how much progress we've made over the last 7, 8, 9 years since CAR Ts first started getting marketed. We are completely transforming the space. This is a paradigm shift to the points that we're bringing up. And the challenges that we're discussing here are very similar and not dissimilar to the same challenges that happened when biologics were being introduced over 25 years ago. We had the same dialogues and debates that were happening at at the Genentechs and Biogens about how are we going to increase access, improve manufacturing, reduce cost of goods, get this to an access position for patients. These are the exact same questions that were being asked 25 years ago that we're now starting to answer here. So I think the challenges are similar. We've also made a lot of progress. I think the number of sites that are now starting to be being authorized for these treatment centers is just one aspect of that. But I think the progress that we're starting to make with gaining access into non-traditional sites, sites in the community, sites that are closer to patients, is actually going to help to start unlock some of that. And the other thing that I think we're probably not taking into consideration enough is 7 or 8 years now on, we have data now in patients that are showing the long-term durability of this in patients that we just didn't have when we were first launching CAR T therapy. So 5-year data plus in the hematological space. In our case, as a leader in the autoimmune space, we now have in our first 2 indications patients out to 2 years and showing an ability to be off background therapies, off background immunosuppressants, and actually living a drug-free, disease-free life. So those milestones and the context that we're putting in from the value versus risk trade-off are important things that we need to continue to educate around this as we continue to expand and gain access for patients more broadly around the US.
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount in what you just said there. So many nuggets of progress, yet opens up to, okay, so how do we do this faster? How do we make more progress toward? As I think about the referral process, I just want to dig a little deeper on referral. Maybe I'll go to Rebecca on this one before we go to Navneet. As we look in the oncology space and we're seeing more and more data on earlier lines of therapy, that referral process being tight or really aligned is important because you want to make sure as we're moving up in lines of therapy to take advantage of this great data that referral process is streamlined and efficient and effective and the patients get to where they have to get get the product. Rebecca, your organization has new data on that.
Yeah. This is a huge priority for us with CARVYKTI to get patients referred in and treated as early as possible. And again, we're pushing on 2 fronts. One, the referrals that you mentioned. There's a huge educational gap. I think there was some data stated before about the number of physicians outside of treatment centers that aren't really aware of the data. So that's something that we're working on. Also, it does give me comfort that other companies are also working on that across the referrals. So it'll take all of us as an industry because we're seeing it across diseases that the earlier, at least in the oncology and hematology space, the earlier patients get to these therapies, the better. But we are really out there. Also, the physicians in the treatment centers are asking us for help. So they want to make those connections with the referring physicians and make sure that they're coordinating on a patient care and are ready to give the patient back to the referring center for management after the treatment. So that's also something that we prioritize. And so really expansive educational program of the referral centers as well as those connections we're making. And as Warner mentioned, we are expanding our footprint into the community setting, and it is requiring that we make some new models to align to how they also function, which I know other companies are as well, which we're really excited about. So it's kind of on 2 fronts that we're doing that, as well as treatment with cell therapies in the outpatient setting is really critical to expansion to the community setting. And I know with CARVYKTI, we're currently, it's about almost 60% treated in the outpatient setting, which also helps with that expansion and is a really great achievement to see for physicians learning how to better manage these patients. So I think there's a lot of work to do there, but I agree we have made a lot of progress. And with the data that's coming out, I mean, I agree, long-term survival data has been incredible. With CARVYKTI, we've seen 1/3 of patients still progression-free after 5 years in the late line setting. In the early line setting, we haven't had enough follow-up yet, but the results look really stellar. So we're really excited to really educate on both those fronts that we think will heighten awareness. Also, the media is picking this up. I think New York Times was mentioned before. Also, similarly, with our survival data, we had a New York Times article in Forbes and a bunch of different pickup that really did help educate the patients. So patient education is also a critical pillar for us because if they go in and ask for it, they will get referred. So it's really important that we all get out and educate patients on knowing what their options are.
So Navneet, from a provider, you get referrals for clinical trials all the time and commercial patients from an access standpoint. I want to focus your thoughts on how the referral process from a commercial CAR-T has evolved for patients.
Yeah. So I was going to ask Joy, I think we have 40 minutes left in the session. Can I spend 40 minutes on this topic? Because it is so complicated, guys.
You could go longer.
Right? This is so complicated.
I mean,
I think we make this simple as sound bites, right? But this is so complicated. We live it all the time, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen this trailer before. We've seen this trailer before for 40 years in transplant. Okay, same issues, right?
Yeah.
1 in 4 patients with myeloma gets an auto transplant. 1 in 4 patients with leukemia gets an allo transplant. And now 1 in 5 patients with lymphoma, myeloma gets a CAR-T. It's the same issues, right? So physicians, right? So their knowledge base, their perceptions, competing therapies. I mean, we've got people going out there, hey, use bites before CAR-Ts, you keep your patient with you. You got incentives for that, right? And I mean, as cell therapists, we recognize fresher T cells are better versus beat up T cells, right?
Yep.
But I think so these are the referring physician aspects, their knowledge base, their perceptions, what they're hearing from experts and other people in the field. I think then we have the issues around healthcare disparities. They're still there. They're like socioeconomic status, cultural issues, health literacy, all those are still there. I think that's such a big piece of this. I think the models of care delivery are an impediment, right? You talked about outpatient CAR-T. Like I mentioned, we'll do 350 plus CAR-Ts across our network this year. 80% will be done in the outpatient setting, right? So again, but a lot of sites don't do that, right? So how do you come up with that? How do you come up with novel models of care delivery where these referring physicians feel they have a skin in the game, right? So I think we have some of our colleagues in the community setting who are doing some really cool things to make it work, right? So how do we learn from that, scale it, get to a good place? As we think about this, again, at some point we can talk about our own model. We've got what I call full service sites. We are actually experimenting with a practice in Virginia where they're doing their first CAR-T next month, where our HCA Sierra Care Hospital will serve as an adverse event hospital just for the management of CRS and ICANS. All the care will happen in that practice.
Okay.
Right? So how do we think of these novel care delivery mechanisms as we think about this process? And I think one thing I want to remind everyone here, access is important, but it has to be access with delivery of high quality care, right? And good outcomes, right? So and how do you think about that as well? From a referral standpoint, it's important because once a referring physician has a patient who has a bad outcome, good luck having them send you a patient again.
Yeah, no,
So it's a lot to unpack here, but
No,
I just want to pick up just on one point you said. We've seen this movie before with transplants before and the 1 in 4 and getting stuck around that number. I would agree with that in principle, but what we're seeing and doing differently with CAR-T therapies is very different with that. We have patients, and we've seen these before, that have had both transplant therapy and then have had, unfortunately, a failure with that and went on to CAR-T therapy. You ask these patients, which one would you rather have? And they would take 10 to 1 doing CAR-T therapy again. So I really think that in addition to the efficacy and long-term durability education that needs to play, I think this education around how far we've come in terms of managing CAR-T therapies and the ease that we're actually making it for patients in terms of the side effect profiles and being managed, like you just touched on, in terms of an outpatient setting, are really being underestimated and underappreciated in this thing. I think there's a way to rewrite that movie. And I think part of that is with the education, not just on the efficacy, but on the side effect
across the
profiles
board.
well.
Even transplant has gotten better. We hardly see GVHD anymore, right? So again, I think the whole field is moving. Whatever we do in the CAR-T space will help many things in cancer in general, right? So I think that's the opportunity here. Because again, guys, keep in mind, 80% of our patients get their care in the community, at least cancer patients do, right? So that's where they live, that's where they prefer. I mean, got patients like 45 minutes out of Nashville who don't want to come into Nashville for care, right? So how do you think about that?
I think also the partnership between an experienced treatment center, like you mentioned, with community center that's getting up and going, and the fact that you or the companies can help educate that community center of how to manage their patient, but they know, hey, if there is an issue that comes up, we have Sarah Cannon to go to, and they'll admit and help manage. I think that's also a critical partnership that we see forming in those new community centers that are
absolutely. And the other thing I'll add here, Joe, is as you think about this, and we're using referral as kind of a platform, whether these new models of care that we are developing, care in the community itself, the economics of care delivery for CAR-T is such a big challenge, right? So, and this is not the cost and reimbursement. The cost is one piece, right? There's everything else that comes around the ecosystem of providing care, and we can go into details of that, which is a big barrier, even from a referral perspective.
Well, I agree. I think that when you see the varying models that could occur here from a referral to sites, it gets down to one model is not going to fit for every product, every disease area or category. So a lot of it comes down to trust and communication in the referral process between the providers as well as the companies that are manufacturing these products and quite frankly, the payer system. I want to double click a little bit on another component of this that Warner brought up. So we did some research that basically says oncologists are concerned about the ability to onboard new sites in the United States. And they worry about delivering the product safely and efficiently and the accreditation processes that exist here. And that's another component that, Warner, you brought up, and I think it's a valid point. If you look year over year, we've seen some small increases in new sites. Not what anybody here in Arizona would like to see. How do we accelerate that? What's the barrier that's causing that?
Well, I'll start and you guys can chip in, but one of the things that I think is happening now is this re-adjudication of FASTCT accreditation itself as being a barrier to some of these smaller and non-tertiary sites being able to get access and actually administer CAR-T. And some of the recent changes and dialogues that are happening around modifying the FASTCT accreditation and making it easier for some of these sites in order to still safely administer the therapies, but be able to do it in a less sophisticated setting, I think is really, really important progress. And I think it matches again with the quality of the CAR-T therapies that we're bringing to the market now, which have a better profile in terms of CRS and ICANS, that have more predictable AE profiles that can be managed in an outpatient setting. All these things coming together, I think, are going to be really, really important for bridging that gap. I mean, if you look at it just from taking a step back, I mean, it was a really natural thing when CAR-Ts were being launched to anchor it to something, and they anchored it to FASTCT accreditation because this provided some guidance of how can we safely manage and manipulate patient cells and care for them in a consistent way, and do that in a way that can be administered across multiple different authorized treatment centers. But they were really officially designed for as you know, in a transplant setting, which is where those cells are being manipulated within the academic centers themselves. That's not happening. We're manipulating the cells. So I think a way to change that, loosen up those guidelines to make it easier for centers to actually manage that while the companies continue to take the large burden of the responsibility for managing and navigating that logistical challenges, I think will help unlock this for patients over time.
I'll add on another thing in addition to accreditation. I totally agree with that, are the capabilities that the organizations need to deliver, whether it's from apheresis or holding the product or the hospitalization capabilities. I think now that there's some organizations that are doing it that don't have the in-house capabilities, or they're doing third-party apheresis, or doing a different model for product delivery if they don't have, say, cryo-freezing, as well as, again, the inpatient management is also, they're starting to learn from each other's best practices. And I see them also building on and figuring out with also the manufacturers of how to administer cell therapy if in light of needing to have alternate model for those different capabilities.
You can see I'm itching to respond to this, Joe, right?
I'm ready for you to.
So I think for the panel and the audience, disclosure, I sit on the FASTCT board, okay, and I'm the vice president of FASTCT, okay, so just keep that in mind. And some of this goes into the Texas legislation that was recently passed, right? Where essentially what it said was any commercial payer, if you need to, they have to approve or allow delivery of cell therapies, irrespective of FASTCT accreditation, right? And again, I think the whole premise was access, which we all agree with, right? But I think at the end of the day, that law was misinformed. So let's keep, I think fact is the narrative, but let's take it out of the picture right now. Just talk about this at a high level, right? So now the cell therapies, they've been approved by the FDA as drugs, right? So they've been called drugs. But we all here know they are cell and tissue products, right? So now it's not like, if your back breaks something else, you go to your freezer and pull out a new one, right? Or you go to the closet and pull out a new pill box or something, right? So these are very sophisticated quality pieces. Processes are so important as far as these are concerned. Now, if you look at, so as you think about the patient care experience, right? So as you think about the patient care experience, there are several elements to that. And when Kite, J&J, BMS, whatever company goes and certifies a site, right? Certifies a site, they're focused more on what is happening with the product, right? Who administers it, how it's handled. They go into some of the clinical pieces as well, right? But it's mostly who is handling the product, right? And they don't get into the whole totality of the patient care experience as far as this is concerned. And which I think is okay for pharma companies. One, you don't want to spend all that time and resources getting into it. And second, it's too much of a liability for you to try and put your head around that whole kind of quality process piece, if you will. Now, especially as we try and get these therapies out to the community, right? So as we try and get these therapies out of the community, our healthcare system is fragmented. Somebody else might do apheresis. Chemo may happen someplace else, right? Infusion may happen someplace else. The post-transplant care may happen, or post-infusion care may happen someplace else. And the ICANS care, these patients do get CRS, they do get ICANS. Hopefully in 10 years from now, that won't be the case, but at least today they do. They need a hospital that can manage these complications, right? So who is going in and saying, hey guys, right, okay, the hospital knows what they're doing, the ER has processes in place, the nurses know, what how to identify this. You got a pathway to do A, B, and C. How do you pull this all package together? And I think that is where that patient quality piece is so important. I think currently, FASTCT is what is the gold standard. If it's somebody else, that's fine. But I think that's why this whole totality of quality piece is so important as you think about these therapies.
Yeah, I think a lot of good points here, and it really stresses the delicate balance here of migration of cell and gene therapy access more to the community so that there's less of these care deserts, but yet not at the expense of quality, safety, and delivering the product appropriately, and being able to manage the toxicities and the side effect profiles that occur. That delicate balance continues to evolve, and looking at the infrastructure at the community is a lot different than an infrastructure in an academic center, and those bodies being able to be adaptable to that, to allow for a more consistent and a quicker accreditation, helps patients get access closer. And I think that's the goal of all of us, is wanting patients to be able to get access to these groundbreaking therapies where their family unit is, and to be able to treat those patients locally is a real benefit.
And I think the other thing I'll add here, given my role on the FASTCT board recognized a few years ago that, again, they have to adapt, right? And earlier this year, they put together the community CAR-T working group, which basically has a lot of physicians from a large community practices like, US Oncology Network, One Oncology, FCS and whatnot. And they've worked on, really engaged group of physicians because they want to solve this as well.
Yeah.
Right? They recognize the value of importance of quality. They want to find a solution to this. And I've been very impressed to see them engaged and really participate 100% in this effort. And the goal is they'll be coming out with fit for purpose CAR-T standards. Because you're right. CAR-T standards were, FASTCT standards were transplant, right? So outpatient communities, sites, they don't have to worry about nurse-patient ratios, right? They don't need RADONC on site, right? So all these things that are not needed, that historically have focused around the transplant aspect of FASTCT standards. And I'm really excited that I think this will certainly facilitate some of these quality pieces which are so critical to access, good access, if you will. So I think in the next couple of weeks, these fit for purpose standards will be released by FASTCT, and I think they'll go a long way in this process. And two other pieces that FASTCT is doing in this whole mechanics of making it work in the community sites, they're engaging with payers because they come out with whatever standards they want. If the payers don't accept them, it's moot. Right? So a lot of conversations with payers to make sure, hey, these are the same FASTCT standards you'll see at Sarah Cannon that this community site is going to put in place, right? Yeah. It'll the same rigorous process of getting these sites accredited. And they're also coming up with a provisional FASTCT accreditation pathway where a site has demonstrated they have the quality pieces in place, they've gone through the inspection, but they haven't met the volume criteria for full accreditation that either FASTCT or the payer might want. So again, I think a lot of these things will certainly help from a quality standpoint as you think about these therapies coming through.
I think those are really important, and I don't think I was, and I don't think anybody here is advocating for no accreditation or no oversight on this, because this is actually utmost important for patient safety and management of the patients for the long term. But I think it's a recognition, as you guys are starting to point out, of how far science has come and how far the CAR-T therapies have come, how much knowledge we actually have now on managing these adverse events. And we can do this in a way that's still safe for patients while still opening up access for patients. And I think that's ultimately what we all want here.
And so one last thing on this topic. Okay. I want to take on this conversation, but I think the one thing, guys, for all of you in the audience, right? So I have the provider perspective here, right? And at the end of the day, the way the field is going, I mean, I don't know, we'll have 20, 30 cell and gene therapy providers out there that'll be at my site. My quality coordinator, cell therapy coordinators, they're all overhead. Okay, no one is paying for them. And I cannot have 20 different quality processes. I cannot have 20 different people coming in all the time to audit me, to say, hey, do you have these SOPs and whatnot? It's going to be a mess. So that'll be an impediment to access if we don't have some kind of a centralized, standardized way to ensure these sites are high quality sites.
I think everybody is excited to see the outcome of that committee, and not only the outcome, but the execution of it, right? And how it gets down to the hospitals that are community hospitals. And cell and gene therapy, we've all been doing this for a while, is a team sport. We know it's a team sport. A variety of key players in the institution need to be engaged here. This is not one particular person. Where this really becomes important is yesterday I sat in the summit meeting we had here, and there was a query of the panelists. They said, what are you most excited about? And the theme of autoimmune disease came up. That's a big patient population. And we have to figure this out now and scale this now. Otherwise, the ramifications of when autoimmune disease comes, which is going to be quicker than we think, right, Warner? So tell us about how you prepare to bring the autoimmune product to market with all this going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really exciting time, and I think Kyverna is in a leading position here with our first indication in stiff person syndrome. We've guided now that we'll be finishing our trial, reading out the data in the first half of next year, and filing our BLA in the first half of next year. So this actually puts us in a position to not just be the first company to launch in stiff person syndrome, but be the first CAR-T company to launch in an autoimmune disease period. So to your point, it's coming quickly, and we're spending a lot of time thinking about the commercialization model. The real, I think, strategic thing that we made as a smaller companies, we started with a smaller indication and one that we can actually leverage and go to a smaller group of centers because we know where these patients are. It's a highly concentrated set of patients that are devastated by this disease. There's no approved therapies, and so for them, having a new and for the first time an approved therapy for this condition is actually going to be remarkable. But we're going to be going through the same steps that any other company would go through in order to set up these CAR-T centers, but we can benefit and learn from all the great work that's come before us and actually do it on a more concentrated scale. So we're starting with that, and then our next indication is myasthenia gravis, which is larger. We're enrolling our pivotal phase 3 trial for that, and that will be our second follow-on indication. But to your point, I think it sparks a bigger debate around how do we continue to work with these centers so that they can start to build out the capacity in the centers. And what's really been encouraging, and I think probably a number of you in this room are hearing this, is these CAR T centers that have been set up exclusively to focus around hematological diseases are now starting to expand. I mean, Stanford is now doing our MS trials in an IIT perspective, and they're thinking about, and they have been starting to evolve their centers from just being hematological CAR T focused to autoimmune and going broader to CAR Ts. And that means connecting the specialists within the centers, understanding how they can refer these patients quickly, making sure that they can get involved not just from a clinical trial perspective, but how we can actually structure this so that we can gear this up for commercialization as well. So I think more to come. The good news is we're not starting from square one. I think there's been a tremendous amount of work that's happened over the last 8 to 9 years in terms of setting these centers up, but one that we're going to continue to lean into and help the centers actually build that connection so they can treat a broader base of patients.
Great progress, and I agree. Building off of what we've gone through as an industry is important. Gustavo, from a manufacturing component here, right? We've made significant progress over the years in manufacturing, but you're talking about unprecedented patient populations when you talk about autoimmune diseases, rather larger, much larger space than. What are the implications from a CDMO standpoint or from manufacturing in building capacity and in hitting the desired demand?
Well, I think there is several aspects to take into account. First is the simple, larger volume of production, right? That you need to think if you use the current process in autologous, you need to have multiple centers, you need to have a complex distribution, you need to have also an engagement of the patient since the beginning of the treatment. I think there is the options of going into allogeneic-based cell therapy is really the solution here. You know, thinking about a scalable process, thinking about a process that actually could be centralized and could be applied off the shelf. It will simplify also the protocols of application. And I think there are different options there, right? Obviously, iPSCs, pluripotent stem cells are one option. I think also in vivo treatments may be another option, maybe a bit farther away. And donor matching, allo, maybe as an option. But I think in general, thinking about not only lowering the barrier of entry from the perspective of making the product accessible, right? But also lowering the barrier of entry from the cost perspective, right? And, you know, getting to a point that actually is affordable for the system to treat the volume of patients you need to treat, right? So, and I think that's the real challenge. And I think it was said before, with the antibody process was exactly the same. I remember the early times, and you know, I'm not as young, so I remember the times when we started to produce antibodies and used to cost, you know, $2,000, $3,000 to produce a gram of antibodies, and today you can produce it for 150 or lower than that, right? So the point is, you need to get the industry at the same time as we are preparing all the other aspects of the administration of the treatment and managing the patient once the treatment is available. You need to actually bring the technology to the point that you can lower the cost to something like between $10,000 and $20,000 cost, probably, right? When you start to think, okay, pharmacoeconomically, this makes sense, right? Also, from the perspective of the people that really reimburse this, you know, the healthcare system needs to reimburse this. It makes sense, actually, to enroll large volume of patients because, as it was said, right, you start first with a small indication. You can manage that. But when you need to treat hundreds of thousands of patients, then the game is completely different. And I doubt that can be done easily using autologous systems, even if we are automating, that is obviously a very welcome solution. Even if we are, you know, creating these decentralized options. And I think both can live simultaneously in the market. You know, for some small treatments, it will make a lot of sense to have the decentralized option, and you will have centers of excellence with, you know, patients will go and get treated there. For larger indications, you need to think about a different type of solution, and that's, I think, where the allo route will make a lot of sense, but still work to do there.
Yeah, I think you've raised a really important point, though, is obviously lower costs in manufacturing are going to be really critically important for expanding access to a broader base for these patients. And I think, again, we made a lot of progress. Jason was up here, interviewing Tom and his company, what they're doing, and a lot of manufacturing companies now coming in that are driving down a lower overall cost of care for these CAR T therapies. That's one part of it, but I think the other important part of it is the durability effect. And if autologous CAR T therapies can demonstrate a one and done therapy that can actually get patients out to 2, 5, 10 years, maybe significantly cure a number of patients over the long term, that changes the cost dynamics.
Absolutely.
And the cost effectiveness dynamics incredibly. Because then you're looking at a trade-off, and maybe you're looking at allogeneic that may not be as durable, and you have to have repeated treatments of patients versus a one-time therapy, and there'll be probably a role even beyond smaller indications, I believe, for autologous therapy.
Maybe.
I think from a patient perspective,
I'm going to be the Debbie Downer here for you guys, so okay. Because HCA 190 hospitals, 20 states, right? Got a huge footprint, and you won't believe the amount of sleep we lose over what's going to happen as these autoimmune diseases, or let's say tomorrow something gets approved for breast cancer or colon cancer, right? You can make hundreds of thousands of products, right? But I can tell you our health system is not ready to take that on. Goes back to that economics of care delivery. And it's not about the money only, it's the personnel, the infrastructure, the revenue cycle, all those pieces. I don't have enough apheresis nurses.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, again, it can be an in vivo product, can be off-the-shelf product, nurses trained to infuse these products, right? Quality folks to make sure this is done in a good way, right? Coordinators, who's going to coordinate that care for all that matter, physicians, APPs, PharmDs, I mean, brick and mortar stuff, I can go on and on, right? So that is my concern. I mean, all this tsunami is coming, but our healthcare system, our country is not ready for that today.
Yeah, and as we get more efficient with managing what we have now, the cost to serve should be refined a bit from the standpoint of the health systems, and hopefully we can find where there's economies of scale that we can leverage across, but that's something that I can understand why you would stay up at night. As the science progresses, like I said, Warner, it's going to happen sooner than later. A smaller start with stiff person syndrome, but lupus, myasthenia gravis, that's all coming, and we need to prepare as an ecosystem for it. And the patients are an important component in their voice. I mean, we heard George talk about the fact that you're expanding your focus at the...
Yeah, and I mean, how often do people listen to patients, or how often do we talk about all these other barriers? I think is a question we need to ask ourselves often. But the reason for our shift is, what are the commonalities within this difficult, expensive clinical journey that we go on? So how do we look at that from Victoria's treatment? Because there's a journey of the cells, which is one side, and there's a journey of the patient. And I think we don't detangle them enough. I'm as big a proponent for allogeneic as there is probably in the world, given my background. But if the science isn't there, then patients definitely aren't going to get treated with it. If it's not durable enough to cure, then it changes that transformative, curative nature that we're pushing for at the policy level. So how do we continue to listen to patients continually? And I think at the highest level, we need the whole ecosystem working together. And Navneet pointed to it very properly. We hear it very often. They don't want to drive 45 minutes if they're from a rural area, even to a city. But even if we were to build this ecosystem, and blood banks are the answer, sending a patient to 4 different locations is a patient journey problem from the patient side that we're not thinking about. So how do we get that input well ahead of connecting the whole ecosystem, and then a patient tells you, I don't want to drive to 4 different places. I'm not doing that. I'd rather go get my apheresis at the community center. And I think definitions of what community means can be drastically different as you learn. Talking to Navneet or Gary Simmons and others, we say community in large academic centers as if there's one flavor of each. I think we need to start breaking it down so we can get something done.
Agreed. Community means a lot different things to a lot different people, depending upon where you sit in that community. I agree with you. And in general terms, sites of care in the communities vary drastically. And is this going to be at every site of care? I'm not so sure. But what are the most appropriate sites of community care that cell and gene therapy can be delivered at?
And I think Navneet pointed to we talked about it 2 weeks ago, and I was so excited to hear the partnership between community physician center and a community hospital. In my head, that wasn't happening, and I need to hear it directly from Navneet. well, we should be broadcasting that at a level of these interesting collaborations and connections. We just don't talk about that early enough publicly to get others starting to think that same way.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, that collaboration, trust, and communication is
Absolutely.
important.
And at the end of the day, everybody shouldn't be doing this either, right? So I'll give an example. 190 hospitals across HCA, everyone wants a leukemia program. Okay, and I have the CEO of a 50-bed hospital coming to me, hey, Navneet, look at this huge opportunity. I want to open a leukemia program. I'm like, your complete blood count is a send out, right? I mean, there's no way you're crazy you want to do this. Send this patient to your nearest academic center, right? So I think those are things we have to, as you expand the ecosystem, even, you're right, each community is very different. How do you define community sites? But how do you make sure you have places in all these cell therapy deserts across the country, right,
Yeah.
where you can solve this issue in the community level, right? It's not like Nashville needs another 6th cell therapy center, but what do you do in Johnson City, right?
Yeah.
Or what do you do in Jackson City, and so forth.
And the geographic metropolitan area analysis is an important analysis because that will point to where those deserts exist. And is 5 in one city enough? I don't know. Some of the cities are pretty big. Yeah. But what we do know is when there's nothing within 200-300 miles, that's a problem. And as we evolve with the space, we need to be able to address that. Let's talk I want to dig a little bit more into Georgia's comment on the patient voice. And we were just doing some research at InspiroGene that talks about many patients still see CAR-T as experimental. And there's so many commercially available CAR-T. How do we make sure that that patient voice is an accurate voice, an educated voice on the optionality available to them, George?
Yeah, I think it ties to that exact point of all community hospitals aren't the same and all community patients aren't the same either. But digging in deeper to the real questions about what they're not getting. I mean, we might as well take a disadvantaged community in a major city is facing the same challenge with trust and others. So I think it's taking a different view at what's important to which populations, and coming from a commercial background, what are the personas of these patients that we can actually address and question directly, but with reliable metadata. I often steal from Daniel Kahneman's line, we don't make decisions with numbers, we need a story. It's 100% true. We need Tom up here to tell a story to get people thinking about it, but then we do need to ask hundreds of patients, thousands of patients in these unique settings what they need, and then deliver to that first. So I think our mission is to start stratifying that a bit more. I talked about it on our prep call. We will get the occasional person from middle of nowhere Kansas that says their doctor said it's voodoo. This is not something, this is experimental. It's N of 1, but it is a story that we hear at least a couple times a year still to this day. And those are the patients that find us, that find Emily's story that says, my doctor said this, but I'm looking and it's 7 years post-approval. And there's a documentary on Amazon, and Emily's 13 years cancer-free. And it's, let's have a conversation, connect you with an advocate, and if Tom has enough time while he's working, you can talk to Tom directly and he'll tell you this too. But I think it's different levels of that constantly, but we'll never change everybody's mind about any one thing, but we can all work together to at least broadcast that this exists, how it exists, and what the true risk benefit is through everybody on this panel.
I think executing on that through every channel we can as an industry is so critical. Yes. I mean, you talked about the patient advocacy groups. Many of the diseases, I know at least for multiple myeloma, has a very active, very educated patient advocacy community, social media, the caregivers, also some of the rare diseases do too. We now see cases of the media getting out there that's done an incredible amount of good. We have many examples of people that saw that New York Times article on CARVYKTI several months ago and went in and asked their doctor, and then they could have the right conversation, but the patient didn't even know that was an option, right? Because they weren't told about it. So it's really critical that as an industry, we work across all of those different channels to make sure the more that hears about it. We've seen cases of just kind of talking in casual conversation also. People become aware, and then they can have the right conversation with their physician who might not have brought it up. And then once they bring it up, then they can decide if that's right for them.
Yeah, great point. And I think the entire ecosystem plays a role in that education of that this isn't voodoo, this is science and high science and exciting breakthrough science. And Emily's proof positive of that.
Yeah. And I think as well, maybe part of through all this is not just emphasizing the breakthrough. Part of it is one thing, but I think in some ways that's almost hurt us in some respects, because I think that's fed into the, oh, it's really science fiction, it's very much out there, it's very much experimental, which any patient doesn't want to hear. And I think the fact that we've learned so much over the last 8, 9 years, like I've been saying, and that this has become more normalized, how CAR T gets administered, how CAR T gets manufactured, the success rates we have, the ability to do it with low and manageable side effects in an outpatient setting. These are things that were not there 8 or 9 years ago, and I think that has to be part of the story. The more we make it this special thing on the mountain, it's really hard for patients to get, but somehow we've got to get them up the mountain. I think we're almost doing ourselves a disservice. We have to normalize this and tell this as a part of a normal patient journey that patients should be considering and asking, to your point, Rebecca, what are the right questions they should be asking their doctors?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tom pointed to that with, in the vision statement of the foundation, it's not just survive, it's thriving. So we look at the Superhuman Body film with Emily's 8.5-minute segment. It's about fulfilling the dream of scuba diving and being totally normal. I will lift this not as eloquently as Dr. Ernov would say, but he has this picture of Victoria Gray and Emily together at our Believe Ball in evening gowns. And what he points to so eloquently is there's nothing special about them, and this is the win, is they're just living. This breakthrough happened, but it's just normalized that we make these breakthroughs all the time. So how do we keep elevating that? To Warner's point, I think it's the perfect point around this is normal. If I walked by Emily at Penn, I wouldn't even know that she had gone through anything, and I think that's a better story than this magical place, because that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
So how do we broadcast the thriving? And those are the stories that we want to connect. And talk to any of the patients here. I know Brad Watts is probably dead center. I don't see him, but right here. Victoria, I've never met Marcy tomorrow, first MS patient. I think that's all these breakthroughs and the connection of all of these firsts, because they have the longest thriving going on, and those stories need to be told more than just the survival story.
So every year we come to the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine's meeting on the Mesa, and we look back on what happened over the last 12 months. I want you to look forward to the next 12 months. And I want to close this great discussion with your thoughts on what you think significant progress will be in the next 12 months so that more patients get access on a regular basis to these therapies. Rebecca, let's start with you and go down the row.
Sure. I don't know if this will be 12 months, right? But I really look forward to the day and maybe having some significant progress or milestones on when it's a clinical decision between the physician and the patient, and it no longer involves any logistical challenges, whether it be on the treater's side or the patient side, as well as that they can get treated, again, essentially somewhere that they can drive to back and forth in their home, because that really does decrease the barrier, and we all know that, again, getting these therapies as early as possible in their treatment journey is critical to the outcome.
Navneet?
So, Joe, what I would say is many people have looked at this. We know how many patients should be getting these therapies, right? And we know how many don't, right? So how do you, I think if you can bend the curve, right, I think that'll be optimal. And we all recognize you got to keep chipping away, right? It's policy, reimbursement, workforce development, some of these quality pieces, getting those in place. So it's all of the above, right? So how do you keep pushing the envelope where you got to keep chipping away at all of these multiple facets that impact access so that we start bending the curve?
Great. Gustavo?
Well, I think it's difficult to predict 12 months. It's probably it's easier to predict forward, right? So long term, but I think there is in the next months readings of other applications of cell therapy beyond the original CAR T. All the readings on autoimmune, some of the readings in spaces of treatment of diabetes or treatment of ALS, or starting treatments on the CNS diseases, where this field will expand beyond where it started, beyond the oncologic treatment. And I think that's really, I think we will have more understanding in 12 months. Is this growing into multiple fields beyond the fields where we are currently active? And when that changes, it will force all of us to change. You know, the ones that administer, the ones that sell it and commercialize it, the ones that develop that, we will all need to think differently on how to approach this. And obviously the ones that manufacture it sooner or later too, right?
Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, like I said, we look at this. There's 1 million different bottlenecks within the 3 bottlenecks of R&D, manufacturing, and healthcare delivery, which could probably be split into 20 more categories. We talked about REMS requirements. We talked about the long-term follow-up work we're doing. If we take these little nudges, how do we measure what's effective? So maybe in the next year, these things can happen, but then which one actually had a bigger effect? And can we group them together in a meaningful way by next year to show movement? I've heard the 80% number for 3 years now, and if that's not moving, that's a problem. But how do we know what moved it so we can do more of that?
Okay, George, good point. Warner?
Yeah, well, for us at Kyverna, I think leading the way and being in a position to be the first CAR T company to launch in the autoimmune spaces may help fulfill some of the goals that my panelists have just touched on a few minutes ago. But I'll go back to what you guys have collectively said, and I think some of the work that we can continue to do, as you've said it from a team sport perspective, on how we can chip away at the regulations and the guidelines and the accreditations and the systems that are in place right now that are holding back access for patients. Those are the things that I think become the rising tide that raises all boats for all patients. So I'm excited by that, and also partnering with ARM and everybody in this room in terms of making that happen, because it's not going to be easy, but it's really, really important work.
Well, I want to first thank the panel for a great discussion, and I leave you all with this. We've made incremental progress over the years in getting patients access to these groundbreaking therapies. Through collaboration, through working together, communication, and attacking it as an ecosystem, we can do better than incremental progress. We can make transformational progress for these patients, but it's not going to happen alone. It happens as a group. So thanks for your time today. Hope you enjoyed the panel.
Thanks, Joe.